to me, many challenges that burden me. My heart center shines and calls to me. This is who I choose to be. Sometimes lessons.
Welcome to the Vibrational Alchemy Podcast. This is Penny Fisher, and we are so glad you are joining us for this week's episode. Hello, beautiful souls. How's everybody doing out there? So good to be with you as always. And here we are, episode 25. I can't believe we're here already. I know I say that every week, but there you have it. So before we get started with today's topic, which is the power of the pause, I want to check in and see how your practice of living with the gift of presence is going, um, how you're navigating this place of stillness, this place of living fully in the moment rather than perseverating about the past or projecting into the future. I know this can bring up a lot of stuff, so I'm going to just remind you to be gentle with yourself. Take it nice and easy. Just notice what's coming up. You don't have to connect with it or identify with it. And then use all your tools. Use your breath, use your joyful and gentle movement, um, anything that you have in your toolbox to just let it go. And little by little, this will become your default setting. And this is what we want to do, right? Is live in the moment. That's why they call it being present, right? It's a gift. Yeah. All right, my darling. So let's take a look at this power of the pause. And I have to just give a shout out to my amazing walking sisters in our walk and talk group. This group has evolved from my time with the Energetic Alignment Academy. Shout out to G and Mark. And if anyone out there is interested in growing their business, being coached by people who coach, life coaches, spiritual coaches. They're really amazing. And so we talk about all kinds of things on our walks each morning. And earlier this week, this idea of the power of the pause came up. And we drilled down pretty deeply, and it's really been simmering for me. So I thought it would be really a lovely thing to share with you. So as I was thinking about this, it brought up a memory for me that principal I used to work for many, many moons ago, incredibly wise and beautiful being, more like a big sister to me. When I was younger, actually, I knew her. So a shout out to Victoria. Shared with me that she was working on something. She was working on being more present in her life, and not only in the kind of difficult and challenging spaces that she had to navigate as a school administrator, but also in her personal life. And what she was working on was this idea of literally taking a breath before she spoke. So if she was in a conversation, if she was in a meeting, if she was at the grocery store, that she would pause and breathe before she began to speak. So that stuck with me, and I didn't really get it. In full disclosure, I haven't, it's not something I've really worked on with any kind of diligence over the years. But as we were talking about this idea of the power of the pause, this memory came back up for me. So I wanted to share that with you in the service of what that can actually look like. Okay. And I've been thinking a lot about why this actually matters. Like, who cares if you've got a mind that's always on in go mode and you've got thoughts, you've got ideas, you're ready to rock and roll? Like, why pause? What's the purpose? And I have two thoughts about that. Um, the first has to do with something that my very first teacher and my closer to me than a soul sister said to me years ago, my friend Rosa. She had a professor who used to say that every conversation between two people is about power. And I will tell you that that stirred my cheese. It got my back up. I'm like, that can't be true. I can just be in a space and have a conversation with my friend or, just hang out with somebody I love. It's not about power, blah, blah, blah. Well, that stayed with me. And over the years, I did start to pay attention to the kinds of conversations I was having and the way I was having those conversations. And sure enough, as is always the case with Rosa, she was 100% right. Right? It is about power. Now, we've talked about this before in other episodes, but remember that power doesn't have to be a bad thing, right? My favorite educational reform theorist, Michael Fullan, talks about three different kinds of power. And I'm sure there are more, but this has just stuck with me. He talks about power over, which is the kind of power that we don't like, right? It's when somebody bosses someone else around or takes their power away. We have power for, which is when I'm using my power on behalf of someone else. So very often as adults, we are in the power for um, version of this when we are advocating for children or people who can't speak for themselves, right? And then the third kind that he advocates for, at least in leadership, is power with. And that's what we called shared leadership, where I am not large and in charge. I am not the sage on the stage. I am the guide on the side, right? I am sharing my power with other people. And so I really started to pay attention and the dynamics of my conversations and most especially with my partner, right? Because those are the places where the biggest triggers happen, at least for me, right? The people we love the most can sometimes be our biggest triggers. And I started to pay attention to why I was saying the things I was saying in conversations. And I noticed that sometimes it was literally, I just wanted to validate myself. I just wanted somebody to listen to me. Very often it was because I was trying to um, shift his perspective. I wanted him to do something I wanted him to do, or get him to agree with me or change his thinking, right? And I, s- a- as I blah, 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 as I moved through this, right, it I started to lean into this power of the pause. I was really not good at it at first. I'm better now, still a work in progress for sure. But that moment of pausing, either before I said something or even in the middle of a conversation. And again, full disclosure, it was easier for me to do this in the middle of a conversation because I don't know, I could listen to myself and all of a sudden I would be like, what the heck am I saying? When I could pause and come into that place of just stillness, even for a minute, even for a second, I could ask myself, why am I having this conversation? What's my point here? And then, if it was really about power over, I could take a breath and shift my trajectory. I could start asking questions instead. I could start restating something that the other person had said in order to validate where they were. I could um, come into a place of love. I could come into this place of compassion. And this for me in my day-to-day conversations, in my day-to-day way of walking through the world, this for me absolutely is part of the power of the pause, right? It invites me um into that space of the heart from which I can create the container of compassion. And if you haven't been with us for every episode, you might want to check out episode 18, because episode 18 talks about this container of compassion, what it is and how we can create it, and ultimately how we make this our default setting and we absolutely just live there. Because from there, my darlings, we can hold space for someone else's journey. We don't have to move into judgment. We don't have to um, we don't have to be attached to our own way of seeing things, our own way of doing things, our beliefs. We don't have to impose them on someone else. When we use that power of the pause and we take advantage of that moment, no matter how short it is, to come back into alignment with our beautiful hearts, we can walk in the world in a very different way. And as we do that, we send out a vibration that invites other people to do that as well. Right? I was running a workshop last night that was just filled with amazing people who were asking, like, how do I navigate negativity and chaos in my day-to-day life? Well, the power of the pause is one of those things that can absolutely help us do that. Right? Reason number two that we want to work with the power of the pause is actually an extension of this idea of shifting the way that we um, utilize power in our conversations. Um, and I think that uh, this reason really bears unpacking. That's the word I want. It really bears unpacking, especially because if you are on this, listening to this podcast, or have been part of our vibrational alchemy family in any way, shape, or form, right? With our daily gratitude journals on TikTok and Facebook and Insta every day, or you've been following the podcast, or you're just copping onto the work once a month workshops, you know that where we want to come into is the place of alignment with self love that's in our hearts, right? And when we tap into the power of the pause, it gives us that moment, that nanosecond to tune into the energy that is around us. It might be the energy in someone else's field. It might be the energy in the words that they're using. It might be the energy of a place, right? We've all had that experience where you walk into a store and you're like, ooh, yeah, no, this is not for me. I'm out of here. Right. So when we have that moment to tune into the energy that is around us, especially when we're in a space of interaction with others, we can start to connect with two questions. What is happening here? And what wants to happen here? And not always, but I would say for me, at least 9 times out of 10, what wants to happen is simply that the energy in that space wants to be held in the container of compassion. It wants to experience love, because what any energy that has not been imbued with the energy of love wants is to go back to its original blueprint, which is love. Right? How often in the daily gratitude journals do I invite all of you to remember that you are love? It's who you are, it's who you've always been. And so when we come into the power of the pause, we can tune in and say what is happening and what wants to happen. And there's something really cool that happens when we come into that space of the open heart, where we just hold the space for whatever the people around us are going through. Because when they feel safe, when they feel seen, and when they feel special, then they can start to tap in. They can allow the wounds to come up. They can allow themselves to feel their emotions. And all you're doing is holding space for them. You're not trying to fix anything. You're not trying to give them advice. My daughter taught me this years ago because I was always the one who wanted to help everybody and fix everything. And she came to me with a problem one time, and I went into, advice, mommy advice fixing mode. And she got really angry with me. She's like, Mom, sometimes I don't want you to fix it. I just want somebody to listen. And it brought me up short. So, more wisdom from a then young child um, about this power of the pause. Just be in the space, right? It doesn't always have to, you don't always have to be on because sometimes people just need you to listen. And when you do that, you can mirror back to them who they are. You can be the mirror that reflects to them their beautiful light, their sacred heart, their connection with the cosmic matrix, their connection with the cosmic heart, their deep and profound alignment with source in whatever way they experience source energy, right? And so if we extrapolate that out, if we extend that out, then we know that the power of the pause ultimately is a gift that we can use with ourselves, right? Because everything that's swirling around us is simply a vibrational match to what's resonating within us. And so, what we want to do now is hold space for ourselves. And as I really started playing with this, I noticed that the crazy dialogue that happens in my head, and listen, I am the person whose brain is perpetually on. My brain just goes on and on. I'm the Energizer Bunny, right? Turning it off is not easy for me. But working with this power of the pause has really helped me. And here's where I started with this. So let me give you some things that you can do to get yourself chugging down this road if it feels in alignment for you. So I started to pay attention to what was going on in my own inner dialogue. Like, how am I interacting with myself? And I noticed that, at least for me, my inner dialogue consists pretty generally of one of three kinds of interaction. The first kind is self criticism or judgment. Now, I've gotten much better at recognizing that and interacting with it differently. But it used to be that that's all it ever was, right? The second kind of interaction is that I can be like cheering myself on. You've got this, Penny. You're going to be okay. This is okay. This is your moment. You da, 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 da. Or having grace for myself. Oh man, I just messed that up, but it's okay. I'm going to drop into my heart. I'm going to breathe. I'm going to be okay. And the third kind of dialogue that I've noticed is this space of curiosity. Now, you'd think that staying in number two, right, being the cheerleader and having grace for myself, that that's the place I would want to live. But here's what I've discovered. When I live in that space too much or too long, very often it is a signal to me that I am avoiding looking at the really deep, heavy stuff. It's easier to cheer for myself and bury the pain, the fear, the anger, the judgment. And the power of the pause can give me just that little bit of time to start myself down that goody trail of knowing myself, right? So if your brain works like mine does, if your inner dialogue works like mine does, this is what that goody trail might look like, right? I've done something. Oh, let's take this workshop that I just ran this week, and of course, I made it for the last day of Mercury retrograde, and so we got into it, and it's 1 minute before the workshop's going to start, and nobody's on the call. I have 111 people registered, and nobody's on the call. Well, the Zoom link wasn't working. So what was my default thinking in that moment? You idiot. What did you do? Oh my God. What's going to happen? People aren't good. People are going to be upset. Nobody's going to show up. Da, 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 da. Right. So that was my place of judgment against myself. And I didn't have time to step away from the computer and say, oh, I'm just going to go sit in my meditation chair and I'm just going to breathe and be still. I didn't have time for that. So instead, I took a deep breath and I figured it out. And as I was doing that, I moved into the second kind of inner dialogue. Okay, Penny, you've got this. It's going to be okay. People will show up or they won't, and it doesn't matter. It'll be okay. It'll be okay. Right? So cheering it on, get through the workshop. And now I leave the healing room here and I go out, and my husband, my partner's there, and he says to me, how did it go? And I said, well, not well. And I told him what happened. So I'm back into judgment and criticism against myself. And then I had some time to just sit. And as I was able to sit and breathe for a minute, I was able to say, huh, wonder what that was really all about. I could blame it on Mercury retrograde for sure, or I could own the fact that nothing comes into my space unless it's a vibrational match. So, what was going on there? Was I nervous about the workshop and really didn't want somebody to show up? Was I craving a crisis to get my adrenaline going? Was this a place of, like, I don't know. But I got to be in this space and ask the experience and the self judgment and the criticism what it was here to teach me. And I was able to sink into my sacred heart space, to just sit there, to create this container of compassion, to invite the embarrassment, the anger at myself, the confusion, the fear of not being seen as being good enough or professional enough. I was able to invite it all into my sacred heart space and just let it rest there for a little bit. Little by little, it shifted, it transformed, and it transmuted because I just allowed it to be infused with unconditional love. So my power of the pause there came when the event was done. But even then, I could have told myself this story. Like I said, I could have blamed it on Zoom. I could have blamed it on the retrograde. I could have externalized it till the cows came home. But the power of the pause allowed me to own that I had co created that situation for better or for worse. Nothing terrible had happened. Everybody was okay. People showed up. We had a great time, I think, anyhow. So the power of the pause can come when it is needed. It can come as you're at the beginning of something, it can come while you're in the midst of it, it can come while you're at the end. But what I'm inviting you to do is start to play with that power of the pause. And sometimes you're not going to get resolution. I didn't get an answer. I still don't know what that was all about and still sitting with it. But Tom Kenyon says that simply by bringing our attention to something, we change our relationship with it. And that's what we want to do. We want to change our relationship with anything that is not at the vibration of the unconditional love of the cosmic heart, because it's not who we are. We are 100% in alignment with that vibration of unconditional love. We are in alignment with source energy. We are that light and that love. And the more that we can remember that, the more that we can connect with it, the more that we can sink into it, the more our vibration flows out into the world as pure and unconditional love. I have a mantra that I have on sticky notes, like on my bathroom mirror and on my desk and on the monitor. I ask to be transformed into a perfect field of pure awareness through which love flows without obstruction. It's from the Way of Mastery. It's not mine, but that's what we're going for, my friends. And I would actually say we don't need to be transformed into that at all. All we need to do is remember. Just need to remember who we are. And I promise you, the more you do this, the more you practice this power of the pause, the more you will come into alignment, the more you will remember this truth that no outer circumstance has control over you, that no one's words can trigger you, that no situation can change the fundamental truth of who you are. They're triggers. The triggers that are there are designed to get us to go within, look at ourselves, and discover where we can love ourselves more deeply. And the power of the pause allows us to find space between the emotional reaction and this mm, conditioning. I was going to say hardwiring, but it's not hardwiring, it's conditioning. This conditioning to attach to that our identity, to attach to the story that we're not good enough. We're not smart enough. We're not technically literate enough. We're not pretty enough. We're not young enough. We're not old enough. We don't make enough money. We displeased our parents or our siblings or blah, 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 right? The power of the pause gives us enough space to release those identities, to release those wounds, so that we can come back into the heart space, allow whatever has happened for us, whatever the trigger is, to teach us and to show us where we really want to be. And then to just allow the transformation and transmutation process, right? Because it's what we're doing. We're always coming back into love. We're always asking, where can I love myself more? And as I said to this group the other night on the workshop, that's your magic, my friends. That's your inner magic, is self-love. Because when you love yourself unconditionally and without reservation through the good, the bad, and the ugly, then that's the vibration you send out into the world. And that's what's going to come back to you. It's just the way it is. And the more you work with this practice of the pause, the more it will become your default setting. And when you walk in the world that way, and here's the dirty little secret, right? The stuff, and I'm air quoting, never stops coming. It's part of the human experience. The triggers will always be there. But the way in which we choose to move through it, when we employ tools like the power of the pause, we are able to come back into equilibrium. We are able to navigate the stuff with more balance and ease. And honestly, it doesn't come around as often. Or if it does, it doesn't trigger us. The charge is released. And when you feel more quiet in the eye of the storm, and I think we talked about this last week in last week's episode, then you can drop into your heart with more ease. Then you can access and hear the inner guidance of your beautiful higher self, of your guides, of your angels, of your connection to source. It's always been there. Sometimes we just need a little help to remember that we have permission. It is our birthright to be able to reconnect with it and to walk in the world that way. Because it's who you are. You are a divine and perfect being of love and light. It's how Source sees you, because it's your reality. And it is my sincere wish that each and every one of you would see yourself that way. I am so grateful to each of you for joining me. I am Penny Starhart. This has been the Vibrational Alchemy Podcast. And until we are together again next week, please remember, You are loved, and you are loved.
This is who I choose to be.